At this time, want to introduce to you Amelia Fox. Amelia Fox is a Anishinaabe 2S LGBTQ youth advocate who takes initiative in program development, First Nations relationship building, and project management. Amelia is a 2S Indigenous person from Kitigan Zibi Anishinaabe and Bearskin Lake First Nation. She graduated from Lakehead in 2020 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. Very passionate about working with the barriers that First Nations to us LGBTQ community members face. And as such, Amelia founded the Niizhaayek Alliance in 2019 and is currently the lead coordinator of the collective. Amelia is here to present to us on supporting First Nations to us LGBTQ youth. And I know this is really important and something that participants have talked about throughout the week. And so we have an eager and excited audience to hear your presentation, Amelia, and go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Courtney. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I'm excited to be here today to do some presenting. I kind of took the opportunity to educate myself in the process of building this presentation. So I kind of wanted to talk about the colonial impacts on Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identity and the relation to MMIWG2S as well. The first portion will be discussing this, and the second half of my presentation will be talking about Niizhaayek Two-Spirit Alliance. I just wanted to give a quick introduction. My name is Amelia Fox. I identify as Two-Spirit and Indigenous. I was born and raised in Thunder Bay, but when I introduce myself, I often refer to where my parents come from as well, which is Niizhaayek or Bearskin Lake First Nation and Kitigan Zibi Anishinaabe. I hold a BA in psychology, a BA in political science, and a graduate diploma in business. I wanted to talk briefly about my experience coming to terms with my identity. So I started noticing I was a little different in grade 2, but in grade 4, my friends and I were around 10 years old, and they were talking about their crushes, and when it came to my turn, I didn't have a crush on anyone, and certainly none of the boys in my class. So to fit in, I just kind of blurted a name, and it stuck with me for the remainder of elementary. I had my first crush when I was in grade 7. That was in the early 2000s, so the media often portrayed LGBTQ plus community with a negative lens. I'm sure, well, yeah, I guess like there were tons of gay jokes in the comedy movies at the time. Like, I know one example I can think of is Scary Movie franchise. There's like tons of gay jokes in that movie, and I'm assuming that's where I kind of developed this shame. So I started denying that part of myself, and it wasn't until grade 9 when my friend asked me if I'm a lesbian, and immediately I said no because that shame was still so strong for me, and I was in major denial. I gave it a long thought for a year, and I came out in grade 10 to my friends. I still struggled with my identity, and I also came out to my family around the same time. And my family was very supportive, but my mom was also supportive as well, but she was fearful that I would be experiencing life as not only an indigenous presenting woman, but also as a person that is part of the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identity. So those intersectionalities is what she was fearful. She was fearful of me going into the world and experiencing life as an indigenous presenting person plus being part of the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community. And I kind of interpreted that and took that on as rejection. But it was in my early adulthood that I found that, that's why she was scared, is because the discrimination or the potential violence that I'd be, I guess, exposed to as a result of my identities. So I still struggled with my identity, and in university, it was the first time that I had been exposed to the term Two-Spirit. I read Manish Akabi's biography, and I was surprised to know that our cultures have known people like me. This wasn't the end of my struggle with my identity, but it was the beginning of finding who I am according to my ancestors. So I started to piece together how colonization changed how people like me view themselves and how others around us view us. I started finding things that were, I guess, piecing together a puzzle, and I'm still finding these pieces as I continue to live as my authentic self. I just wanted to say again, before I begin the rest of my presentation, that I'm grateful for this opportunity to be sitting before you all today to present on something that means so much to me. I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the presentation. First, we'll be looking at a historical timeline of Two-Spirit people. I think it's from the 1970s until around the 2000s. I couldn't include every single event, but I did want to show where the revitalization was starting. I'll also be looking at our understanding of Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identity prior to contact. So this was before conquistadors and explorers came. I'll also be addressing how colonization has challenged Indigenous views of gender and sexual diversity. I also wanted to review early colonial accounts of Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identity from journals of the Jesuits. And after that, I'll be looking at present day impacts, followed by MMIWG and Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identities, what I envision the future for Two-Spirit LGBTQ Indigenous people to look like, and I'll be talking about Niizhaayek Alliance. I couldn't include everything, but Two-Spirit people have existed since time immemorial, and this slide is meant to outline key moments in history that began the revitalization of Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identity in First Nation and Indigenous communities on Turtle Island. So queer people have existed and lived openly prior to contact. This will be shown through the next few slides. And over the course of colonization, residential school, the reserve system, Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people began experiencing oppression from our own. However, as cities began to develop, many Two-Spirit people migrated to the cities to find one another and a more accepting atmosphere. In 1975, the Gay American Indians banded together in San Francisco, and they are a gay rights organization founded by Randy Burns and Barbara May Cameron. At this time, they were the first organization for queer natives in the US. In 1979, the Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society in British Columbia formed, and I kind of noticed that maybe that's where the beginning of an Indigenous movement in Canada started. In 1988, the Basket and the Bow, which was the first ever formal gathering for Two-Spirit people, began, and it included Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people across the US and Canada. And I think this gathering is now known as the annual International Two-Spirit Gathering. So it's been hosted all over Turtle Island over the last 30 years. And I didn't even know about this until like recently. And I think that's super cool that this has been going on. And I don't know, I think exposure to it has helped me in affirming who I am as a person. In 1989, the Two-Spirited People of the First Nations formed in Toronto. In 1990, at the third annual International Two-Spirit Gathering, the term Two-Spirit was coined by Elder Mira Laramie when she shared it in a sharing circle, and it's now widely accepted amongst the queer Indigenous community. Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits, formerly the Gay American Indians, held their first Two-Spirit powwow, and it is now known as the largest Two-Spirit powwow. Since then, there have been considerable advancements in the 2S Indigiqueer movement. There are now 17 Two-Spirit organizations under the International Council of Two-Spirit Societies. So this includes the Two-Spirited People of Manitoba, Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance, Saskatoon Two-Spirit Society, and Edmonton Two-Spirit Society, to name a few. These events in queer Indigenous history have ignited a path for young people who are like me. And I think we're starting to find our roots again, which is like super important for Indigenous queer youth. The first point that I think I should address is that it's important not to generalize that all pre-colonial nations accepted and celebrated gender and sexual orientation diversity. However, according to the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus subworking group, so the subworking group conducted the MMIWG Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus National Action Plan. Within that report, there are 150 terms in different languages that acknowledge and describe gender diverse people. This report also mentions that there's evidence in over 2/3 of 200 Indigenous languages that were using terms to identify people who were neither men nor women or a third gender. And historically, Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people held special roles in their communities. Our elders tell us of people who are gifted because they carried two spirits, that of a male and a female. And it is told that women engaged in tribal warfare and married other women, as there were men who also married other men. So these individuals were looked upon as a third gender, and almost all cultures they were honored and revered. They also performed a specific set of social functions. So in some tribes, male-bodied two-spirits were healers, medicine people. They conveyed oral traditions and songs. They were nurses during war expeditions and foretold the future. They arranged marriages. They were artists, quill workers. They made regalias. They also set up the central post for the sun dance. And in other tribes, female-bodied two-spirits typically took on roles as like leaders, chiefs, councils, traders, hunters, trappers, warriors, visionaries, prophets, and medicine people. So to be a two-spirited person was an honorable role in our communities because of the gifts they carried, and essentially they were vital to community survival. I wanted to also talk about early colonial accounts of two-spirit LGBTQ plus identity. Colonization has changed how we view two-spirit LGBTQ plus identities in our communities. And this slide is meant to show where the ideology came from that anything other than cis normativity and heteronormativity is condemnable. And I think like in the previous presentation, you had heard about cis normativity and heteronormativity. And I'm hoping I'm not repeating too much of the same content, but basically cis normativity is feeling and appearing as the sex you are at birth and assuming that everyone else is who they are according to how they appear gender wise. And then heteronormativity is assuming that heterosexuality is the preferred and normal sexual orientation. So this slide covers Jesuit journals from the 1700s, but even I wanted to note even prior to the 1700s, when the Spaniards and conquistadors were invading our southern relations, the Spaniards were violently exterminating gender and sexually diverse indigenous people. So Spanish law considered gender and sexual diversity to be offensive to the king and Christianity. And this furthered the justification that indigenous people were basically subhuman. It advanced the extermination and genocide of indigenous peoples in the South. Coming back to the 1700s, when the Jesuits were beginning to occupy Canada, they were using the same perceived racial inferiority and terra nullius to begin colonization in North America. Looking at these Jesuit accounts, Jesuit Joseph Francois Lafitteau saw women with manly courage who prided themselves upon profession of a warrior and men living as women. This kind of goes to show how open two-spirit LGBTQ plus identities were in the 1700s. I've heard that many communities lived by the virtue of non-interference. So two-spirit LGBTQ plus people, you could kind of derive from that they were able to live and exist freely. The next account was Jesuit Pedro Font, also had an entry where he saw men dressed like women. He believed in eradicating this behavior and establishing Christianity to reduce what he deemed nefarious conduct. I got this information from a paper written by Martin Cannon. The third account was Jesuit Jean Bernard Bossu. They saw early two-spirit LGBTQ plus indigenous people and stated they are morally perverted and addicted to sodomy. So these early accounts kind of set the stage and helped justify the racist and colonial doctrine of terra nullius. And terra nullius is essentially land not under sovereignty or control of any state or organized political group. So this doctrine removed indigenous people as people occupying these lands and helped justify European conquest. So colonization has challenged indigenous view of gender and sexual diversity. I wanted to show how this happened. The implementation of the Indian Act made our spiritual practices legal. It was created and maintained as a tool to oppress and eliminate indigenous people. It was used to clear the land and prevent indigenous people from present-day self-determination, but it was also a tool to continually enforce heterosexual and colonial gender binaries, meaning like just male or female genders. Residential school and day school was another tool for assimilation. Most of us, if not all of us, are aware of the TRC and its findings. Residential school enforced Euro-Christian values. Religious orders in the government at the time believed that indigenous children needed to be saved, so they created residential schools to, I guess for lack of a better term, reprogram indigenous children and destroy indigenous culture so that children could assimilate into Canada. Jack Saddleback say this before. I think they're currently working for Out Saskatoon, and it's kind of something that really stuck with me, and how the colonial gender was enforced as soon as children stepped into the schools. So children were separated based on gender expression into female or male dorms. Immediately as you go there, you're immediately separated into the colonial gender ideology. As per the sub-working group report that I had mentioned previously, they also stated that two-spirit or gender diverse children would have to choose between either male or female gender and adhere to strict gender roles and heterosexuality being forced upon them, or they had to repress those parts of self. So the report also found that two-spirit children chose to go into hiding to survive worse abuse from priests, nuns, and staff. And one account from Laurie McDonald explained that his experience in IRS was unique because he is two-spirit, and two-spirit children experienced intensified abuse than their non-two-spirit counterparts. The 60s scoop and millennial scoop was also a tool that has contributed. These kinds of disconnecting tactics have resulted in large portions of First Nation people losing like teachings, stories, child rearing practices, and language. Before I move on, I wanted to kind of talk about this story. Last year, we had a podcast episode and a workshop with Ron Indian Mandamin. Ron is a two-spirit elder from Treaty 3 area, and he did a storytelling session with us. And basically within the stories he told us, there were instances of sexual and gender diversity. And these stories I had never heard of, like Nana Buju experiencing life as a woman, or when he fell in love with a man. And these stories were rich with diversity. And you can kind of see, the dichotomy between Indigenous way of life and Christian values. These were the kinds of stories that were meant to be taken away because anything other than heterosexual conduct is perceived as sinful. These are the kinds of stories that reaffirm two-spirit LGBTQ plus people that, we even exist in our storytelling. I feel like those are the kinds of stories that need to be shared more often. It has the potential to save lives, I guess. So the next topic I wanted to discuss was the present day impacts on two-spirit LGBTQ plus people. The National Collaborating Center for Aboriginal Health did a report on the health status of two-spirit LGBTQ plus people, and this slide outlines trends found in 2016. So one of the first trends was violence against two-spirit LGBTQ plus people. This statistic was difficult to gauge, but based on an intersectional analysis, it was revealed that two-spirit LGBTQ plus Indigenous people experience a combination of racism, homophobia, and sexism, depending on their gender identity and sexual identity. And basically that notion is what my mom was most fearful for me as a two-spirit Indigenous woman presenting person. Indigenous two-spirit LGBTQ plus people are also at a higher risk of violence. A certain point I wanted to highlight is that violence against transgender and transsexual women occurs, and in the next slide, I'll indicate when the MMIWG mandate expanded to include gender diverse Indigenous people. So mental health and substance abuse, two-spirit people are more likely to experience mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, and two-spirit LGBTQ plus people are also at risk of substance abuse in order to cope with racism, homophobia, transphobia, and intergenerational trauma. So suicide rates among Indigenous populations is generally much higher than the mainstream population. According to this report, the research indicates that the suicide risk is greater than the heterosexual Indigenous population. And this is, again, due to the intersectionalities such as racism, homophobia, isolation, and transphobia. I also wanted to talk a bit about lateral violence in our communities. I've heard from young people around me that they've experienced lateral violence as a result of their identities, and this is a really big impact on young First Nation people, especially if you're remote or isolated. I think it's imperative that we begin to show them acceptance, love, and support. There were times in my life where I experienced discrimination because of who I am, and those times made me ashamed to be me, but I was lucky to have the support I needed from my friends and family. Some young people aren't so lucky to have that support, and I just feel like we need to begin to address that in order to make a more loving and accepting atmosphere for our two-spirit LGBTQ plus First Nation youth. On June 3rd, 2019, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls released its final report. Initially, NIMMIWG didn't account for gender diverse transsexual Indigenous women who have lost their lives. In the TRC, two-spirit LGBTQ plus people were also excluded. But under the term two-spirit, we make room for our relations who are transsexual and gender diverse. As such, the mandate was originally designed to report forms of violence against Indigenous women and girls, but it was broadened to include Indigenous LGBTQ plus people based on our traditional Indigenous conceptions of gender identity. And on April 2021, the sub-working group developed the National Action Plan, which includes engagement with Indigenous Two-Spirit knowledge keepers to consult the trans community. And through this process, they identified key items that warrant immediate action, such as reforming the justice system to address systemic and historical relationship of Indigenous people to include trans, Two-Spirit LGBTQIA, and Indigenous governance. They also flagged housing security as a multi-generational issue, which requires a response from all levels of government, the importance of educating society as a whole about the acceptance of gender diversity and sexual diversity, harm reduction models in service delivery, and treatment centers that operate outside of the colonial gender binary system. So this ensures the safety for Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus people. Upon review of the NIMMIWG final report, of the 231 calls for justice, 31 of them are Two-Spirit specific. Indigenous Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identities need to be considered when addressing issues related to colonization. The final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit People is one of the first instances to extend this consideration and sets the tone for inclusion. I took some time to kind of envision what the future of Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus Indigenous people can look like. Indigenous Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people have survived despite colonization and assimilation, and we have existed since time immemorial and will continue to exist for generations to come. So when I envision a future for Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus kin, I feel like acceptance from our communities and the MMIWG Two-Spirit LGBTQIA sub-working group words it well to welcome Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people back into the circle. It also looks like igniting our traditional knowledge around gender and sexual diversity. I think it goes to say that support is needed for our Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community members and youth. I'd like to see Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people successful in their roles as political leaders, spiritual leaders, teachers, storytellers, and medicine people. And I think it's begun to be implemented is having seats for Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus roles in leadership and councils in our governance systems. I know Treaty 3 has a Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus youth council. This last point is kind of difficult for me to address because it makes me nervous because I don't want to offend anyone, but for gender diverse Indigenous people, gender teachings can be harmful. And I think there needs to be a safe space for Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community members to attend ceremony in a loving way, especially for youth. I went to ceremony one time, and sometimes my gender is fluid, and I don't exactly identify as a woman all the time. I'm don't really identify as a man either, so I sometimes kind of feel like that I'm neither. And I was at ceremony and I needed to wear a skirt. It kind of felt, I don't know, I didn't want to be forced to wear a skirt, but I did anyway, and I went to ceremony, and there was something else that I did that women aren't supposed to do, and immediately I started questioning my place in the circle, and I was like, do I belong in my ceremony right now? I couldn't stop thinking about that, and I couldn't stop thinking about how many other young people experience that question. Do I belong to be in ceremony if I'm not allowed to be who I am and join ceremony based on how I feel inside? And I started crying. I cried all evening because ceremony is what connects me to myself, and it's what helped me through the difficult times that I experienced as a young person. And I started thinking about the other young people who have been turned away from their culture based on that notion. So I think, it's imperative that we make space for our Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus youth who want to connect to ceremony, but are turned away from the colonial gender binary that we have adopted, I guess. I think that's something that is important to do moving forward. I'm at the second half of my presentation, and Niizhaayek Two-Spirit Alliance is a grassroots youth organization that is creating safe spaces for Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus Indigenous youth in Ontario. We're funded by Youth Opportunities Fund at the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And a little story on how it started. So in 2019, my dad, his name is Charles Fox, he asked me one time, he's like, how many of the youth we lost are like you? I didn't know this at the time, but this question basically changed everything for me, and it stuck with me. It's kind of what got me started, and it's what keeps me going. So I started searching for funding to begin programming for Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus First Nation youth. I was approved and I received funds through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. I approached Chiefs of Ontario, and at the time Roseanne was regional chief. I pitched the idea to her, and it was the first time I ever pitched an idea to a chief, and she agreed. So Chiefs of Ontario is a regional mentor, and we're supported under the current leadership of Regional Chief Hare. Chiefs of Ontario helps immensely with accounting and administration, without who I would not be able to account for any of my expenditures because I have no idea. Yeah, so that's kind of like a background story of where Niizhaayek Two-Spirit Alliance comes from. So our mission statement, Niizhaayek Alliance aims to reduce stigma and risks associated with being part of the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community through engaging youth in informative workshops, amplifying Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus voices, and the development of an annual Ontario-wide Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus youth gathering. So what is Niizhaayek Alliance? Niizhaayek in Anishinaabe means two of us. My dad was suggesting names. I was thinking of naming the gathering Niizhaayek Pamoswin, which means walking in two worlds. And I kind of just took Niizhaayek and turned it into the name for the alliance because it kind of means two of us, and you need two people to make that alliance. You know, what is two spirit? It means different things to different people, and it's often thought of as a third gender, but it's described as having a masculine and feminine spirit, and it's used by strictly Indigenous people to describe their sexual gender and spiritual identity. I'm the lead coordinator. I work on coordinating workshops. I facilitate engagements with our youth advisory group. I track spending and budget, as well as perform administrative tasks, submitting invoices and check recs. Yeah, I do a lot of like the coordinating stuff. To the right of me is Leslie Spence. Leslie Spence is our podcast director. He plans podcast episodes, edits them, and publishes them. He is from Webikwe First Nation. To the right of Leslie is Lucille Atlukin. Lucille Atlukin is our youth outreach mentor, so they help with amplifying our workshops on their platforms, and they're from Edmonton First Nation. Kay Fiddler is our youth outreach worker. They help with connecting young people to resources and is currently working on developing our own resources and our youth directory. Kay is from Sandy Lake First Nation. Alec Onabigan is our assistant coordinator. He coordinates our online sharing circles and plans themes and topics for them. We're all working on this project part-time. Myself, Lucille, and Leslie have full-time jobs. Kay and Alec are currently pursuing their education. So here we have an overview of year one workshops we provided. We brought in James McCocus and Anthony Johnson. They were winners of the Amazing Race, and we did this in collaboration with the Ontario First Nation Young People's Council. We also brought in young leaders such as Karen Potts and fashion designer Scott Wabino. We had an online drag show and successfully published 6 episodes of the In Between People podcast. We were also actually approached last year by Ryan McMahon, who is a popular Indigenous podcaster, to be featured on a new Crave TV series. I'm not sure when it airs, but we'll be on there as well. This year, we are implementing, and we have implemented, a monthly online sharing circle, which happens every third Tuesday of the month. We're also developing 5 new educational workshops in partnership with our youth advisory group, which was developed in November. So we have monthly meetings on strategic planning to plan our upcoming podcast episodes or workshop themes. I really want to see a Two-Spirit Elders speaker series, so that's something that I've been working on recently. We've also created new organizational partnerships with Nan Legal. So with Nan Legal, we're working on a podcast series, and we've advised on changes that could be made to support Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people who access their services. We're also in partnership with Frame, which is a national youth mental health network. They amplify our sharing circles, and they'll be sharing our workshops with their networks. I'm also working alongside Robin Kakigamic, who is the Two-Spirit mentor at the Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Center. We've been mostly working on local youth outreach. It's currently on pause due to COVID restrictions, but we have been able to do a couple of presentations. We have also worked and are continuing to work with the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS strategy. So we worked on a discussion with them, a video discussion about HIV/AIDS and sex health. I have a link here, and if there's enough time, I might be able to review like 5 minutes of it. Lastly, we're also working on developing some of our own resources. So, like a trans health resource, a sex health resource, a parent resource, a youth resource, and a terms resource from our own point of views. I wanted to talk a little bit about the In Between People podcast. This is a podcast for Two Spirit people and allies to share experiences, knowledge, and resources. We are amplifying the voices of Two Spirit LGBTQ plus people and are navigating the impacts of colonialism on our identities. As I've mentioned, we have 6 episodes published on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, and they cover a variety of topics such as Two Spirit health, identity, culture, and they feature interesting special guests each episode. So these are some photos from year 1 and year 2. The first image in the left-hand corner is when we were filming the Crave TV feature. We were in the Delta here in Thunder Bay, and we ended up seeing Romeo Saganash off in the distance. We ended up asking him for a picture, and the individual to the far right was the series director and is also an actress named Amelia Tailfeathers. So we were all like fangirling about Romeo Saganash and had to get a picture. We thought he was cool. The middle top photo is myself and Melody McIver. They were a special guest when the team drove to Treaty 3 for their first Two Spirit gathering in Powwow and Shoal Lake this year. That's something that really sticks with me, and it really sticks out because, you know, I'd love to see Two Spirit gatherings and powwows all the way across Ontario because, you know, it's such a celebration, and to be seen like that means so much. The far right photo is Kay, Alec, Rennie Boucher, myself, and Leslie after filming our HIV/AIDS discussion. So this was aired at the National HIV/AIDS Strategy Conference, December 2021. The bottom left is Leslie and Alec during one of our podcast recording sessions. The bottom middle photo is also in Shoal Lake when we met with Wab Canoe. And the bottom right is a photo of myself and some high school youth from one of our local outreach sessions in Thunder Bay. And this was done in partnership with the Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Center. So that concludes kind of some information about the colonial impacts on Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus identities, and you know how it kind of builds up to why I started Niizhaayek Alliance and things that we can do to support our youth, which includes creating safe spaces for youth in ceremony, you know, supporting them. I extend the invite to all of you who are here today to reach out to me if there's any questions. My email is niizhaayekalliance@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. And then my last slide is just our resources that I used for this presentation.
Awesome presentation, Amelia. I know that I have been getting some questions just from earlier in the presentation about how do we integrate and create that safety in our communities. And I just also wanted to say, like, you know, there's a lot of things in the chat. Most of them are just so proud of you and encouraging and moved by your work and your accomplishments, and thankful for your presentation, and just so proud of all of that you've been able to accomplish. We've talked a lot about how do we think about the progress that we've been able to make and the milestones that we've been able to move through advocacy, through organizing within the women's movement and within the Two Spirit movement, and what does that look like. And I think this is just a testament to see like all of this creativity, all of this innovation coming from you know, the life's work of some of our elders and older knowledge keepers who have been creating that space for these conversations. So Jillian, do you have a question or a comment you'd like to share?
I just wanted to comment how well done the presentation was, and it was really nice to have you, Amelia Fox. I found it very clear, very informational, but tying into authentic self allowed like this energy and this just such a value for the words that you were sharing. And earlier in the week, we had did this exercise with Michelle Sue about highlighting the areas of the report that spoke out to us. And the number one was safety and inclusivity. So I found that this was a very powerful presentation to be brought into this gathering, because for me, on my heart, that's like the number one thing to reach out to all of our people, is to ensure that there are safe spaces and communities across our nations, right? So I just wanted to say really, really well done presentation. I learned a lot, and I look forward to hearing you again. So nyawa so much.
Thank you, Jillian. That means a lot to me, actually. I've been really anxious. This is the first time I've ever had like an entire hour slot to do a presentation. Like I'm used to like half hours, and I was really nervous. So it's great to hear such affirming words from everyone.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Lillian.
Hi, good afternoon. I was listening to your sharing, and I can really relate to what your fears of coming out because of being two-spirited. Back in the early 70s, like I'm 51 now, I lived my life in hiding because in a small community and in the Catholic world, they were really strict about two-spirited people.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I knew I was different. It was just so hard to express myself in the way that I wanted to live my life because of bullying and lateral violence of people that are two-spirited. And I thought I was the only one because back in the 70s, it was not mentioned of anything like that. No videos, no information on anything. Then as I was growing up, I lost my mom she was murdered in 1986. And if she was still with me, I was 16 when she passed away. And if she was still with me, I'm sure she would have understood and guided me. But I had no additional support after she passed. But my dad went into chronic alcoholism. So I started drinking. And that's how I cope with my identity of because I couldn't share it. And I was fearful, like for neglect and bullying, like I said, and I never heard it anywhere. Then I have 4 children. I'm very grateful for my children. The intimacy of my life was drinking. I conceived when I was drinking for all my 4 children. I regret that because I would get sick when I was intimate with Amelia, and I knew I was different. But role of Catholics and the society of not being open with two-spirited women or men really put me in the closet where I was just abusing alcohol, and that's how I functioned.
Mm-hmm.
Then I finally decided after giving birth to my son in February 1999, I came out after. I said, I had enough of this. I'm going to live my life. I don't have to be blunt about it, like spread the word around. But I told my brother, and I said, if my brother doesn't accept me, then I will still continue living hiding. So I told my brother, and he put his head down after I told him that I was in a relationship. And he said, good for you. Who is he? And I said, he's not a he, it's a she. So he put his head down and for about a minute. Then he looked up at me and he said, if you're happy, I'm happy. And that's the family support that I needed. And I told my other siblings, my 2 sisters, I didn't talk to for 5 years because she was really racial about her comments towards me. And the other one for 10 years because they didn't accept it. But with my favorite brother, I was confident to live my life as a two-spirited woman. I don't go around exposing myself because I work as a victim services worker, and it's challenging still to come out and say I'm a two-spirited woman because in the small communities, I feel like they still don't have that open-mindedness of women or men that are living the same lifestyle. It's still considered, I feel like they're still in their mind, it's dirty. Like, it's dirty way of living. And it's not. I'm really happy. I've been out since 2000, and I live my life more comfortable. Like, I like myself inside, but I still have that fear of telling people. I lost a few friends after I came out too. And good ones I have met, but sometimes I feel I'm afraid to, when I do presentations, because I used to work in a treatment center, I would say my partner, and they won't understand because it was a female partner that I was relating to. It's sometimes it's challenging for me also, but I'm living my life and it's good. I have my children and I'm really blessed with my children. And I stopped drinking now. I've been sober for over 11 years now because my drinking was one of the ways that I had to cope with the way I was wanting to live. Thank you for sharing. I'm really
Thank you for sharing your story, Lillian. That's another reason why I started Niizhaayek, is because a lot of our youth in the North in particular experience that discrimination and that fear of coming out due to the Christian view. So that's another reason, and it kind of goes to affirm the project that I've been starting, is to work with those youth who are in the North. Thank you for sharing, Lillian. I'm very grateful for your story.
We'll go to Lucy and then Fred.
Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you very much for your awesome presentation. It's really beautiful, and I'm just so sorry that you had to feel not wanted at these ceremonies. But sometimes I think even our own medicine people, and especially the medicine people, I think they need to learn the history of our two-spirited people, and to so that they, they can be accepted in our ceremonies, that is available to all. And just to remember that Creator loves all. Another thing that I wanted to just say was just to touch on a little bit what Lillian said and yourself about the youth in these isolated communities. They don't have the resources to access where they are. And I can just imagine it must be very hard on them, because when my daughter came out, when she was 16, it was just so natural and beautiful. And so, and I could just feel the other Aboriginal youth up north who don't have that opportunity because of, the Christianity is so prevalent still up there. And it would be so wonderful to have this kind of presentation, at some of the other, communities like the Muskego Council. I know they have a youth council, and it would just be so awesome for them to hear this presentation. Again, Miigwech, thank you. It was very beautiful, and I wish you well. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Lucy.
My name is Fred Sackney. I come from Constance Lake. I'm sort of like a remote community here, but we have access to Tim Hortons and McDonald's, so it's not too bad. Right now, we're kind of like in a lockdown because of the COVID that's going on and everything. But getting back to your presentation, I really enjoyed it. To hear, like you're coming out and, and being afraid and all that. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is it being excluded from ceremonies. And I don't think that's right, ceremonies, like you said, it's for self and to make yourself feel better and be a part of, right? I think part of our medicine people have been colonized too, like, and the sometimes I go to some ceremonies and they say they went to stand up, sit down. It's almost like going to church, right? So I could see some of those adoptions that have come from there. But I think over time, those sort of things are going to become part of accepting and especially with our I'll just use gay people because I'm an old school guy, right? I thought you were giving your qualifications when you're reading off all these letters. There's whoa, she's well educated. But yeah, we have some people here in Constance Lake who are gay, and they're visible but invisible at the same time because they're kind of like on their own, and you could tell they're isolated. I work at the treatment center here at the on and off as a speaker for residential school. I went to residential school. I don't like the word survivor because it sort of like keeps me there. I like to get out of there and move on, but explain my my relationship to it. How I survived and all that. But I do have some some gay friends in the past, and it was quite normal. We were starting to in Constance Lake. They're acceptable for a lot of people. Run into that when I was a teenager, and seeing other people and all that, and so I became friends with them, and they were just like normal kids to me. So I guess that's part of not being colonized there, but decolonized thinking is something that's sort of like new here in Constance Lake too. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And there's some people that actually think that the Jesuit people were holy. And gradually I came out of the Catholic schools, Catholic Church, and all that because it's very detrimental. It's a very killing machine. I think more and more people will come out of their their beliefs and believe in their own. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, I think. So anyway, I really enjoyed your sharing and your information. That was just tremendous. I'm blown away. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Fred.
Awesome. And then we have Wanda with their hand up. Wanda, would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
just want to say your presentation was amazing, like all morning. And then your presentation, like today, I've just learned so much, like I can't even tell you. And I'm just, I'm so proud. And yeah, keep it up. You youth are rising up. And yeah. But quickly, I have a question. So when I was learning, like when I just got onto my healing path, which was in my 20s, yeah, don't laugh, but I don't know anything about, like, I'm learning here. Okay, so I was told that we wear skirts at ceremony because personally don't care what's between your legs. But if I was somebody conducting, let's say, a moon ceremony, where the women wear skirts, and for personal, like me personally, I just like skirts. I think they're pretty. But I want to know, like, what could I do to be sensitive and to create a safe and inclusive space at this moon ceremony to the two-spirited LGBTQ plus gender diverse population, because it would be open to anybody. Like me personally, I wouldn't want to offend anybody, but that's the teaching I got. So like, what could I say, or what sort of, like, explain why we're wearing skirts? I don't know.
I think that's an excellent question. It's hard for me to say as well because I also don't want to offend anyone, or like I have a tendency to just comply with the way that it's being done and conducted. But I think allowing people to come to ceremony, because sometimes the way I present isn't always how I feel on the inside, and other youth are going to be in similar ways, especially trans youth. So youth who, are questioning youth even, they appear a certain gender, but on the inside it may not match how they feel. And allowing them space to come to ceremony, I think really important because one, it affirms who they are and invites them into the circle. But it's really hard to say because I know we all receive different teachings, and sometimes skirts are worn regardless of gender. And it's like something that I'm actually been trying to figure out myself. But I think the first thing is like it's really hard for me to say, to be honest. But I wanted to thank you for the question because I'm still figuring that out for sure.
No, that's really good. Thank you. Thank you.
This is why there is a Q in the conversation, right? In LGBTQ, it's queer questioning folks, right? And that idea of fluidity, change, coming back to maybe questioning, it is a journey for people, and it can change, be fluid throughout their lifetime. This is a personal essay that spoke really well to me because it talked about questioning and seeking understanding of gender and sexuality as being a lifelong process. For some people, it is very known, immediately from when they're young, but for other folks, it is a lifelong process. So I would like to go to Tracy.
My comment was about the skirt and ceremony as a two-spirit person who appears female unless I am in my regalia and you don't know who I am and how I identify. But one of the things that I heard someone tell me, and I was shocked at the voice that it came from because I didn't expect it, but it was, skirts are admired but not required. And I will not attend ceremony where they tell me to put on a skirt. And if that's a sun dance, a rain dance, whatever, I just, even the moon ceremony, we don't operate that way. So my partner and I, we always, anyone who comes to the fire, when fire keepers, and they go, oh my God, I don't have my skirt on, and that's not my teaching. Because if I'm to accept the people the way they present, that's what I need to do. If they wear a skirt, that's fantastic. Doesn't matter how they identify. But if they don't wear it, they came to the ceremony and that's when the healing begins. That's all I gotta say about the skirt. I'm so negative against the skirt when it comes to ceremony and having to put it on. And I know there's teachings around that. One of the teachings is your children need to see up your skirt so they know who you are. Well, pants have 2 holes, so the children can see up those holes too. Miigwech now, and thank you.
And I do see Vincent Cook with your hand up. Go ahead.
In regards to the skirt or gender identity, I think the traditional way. You know how one of the elders just said that it's a learning curve basically for the leaders in the, you know, in the traditional ways, whatever that is to your community or to your nation. It's similar to when we were talking a few days ago about somebody who's on their journey from addiction, right? Some of the traditional longhouses or whatever you belong to that object to people that are still drinking or that are still taking drugs. That they're not supposed to participate in it too because their spirit's not clean and it's not whatever. And so I just think that similar to what the young man Fred Sackney said, that things are changing and it's a matter of keeping the message out there. We're not going away. Everybody is, you know, the populations, whether you're traditional, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Methodist, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, the people are not going away. So the houses of traditional practices or religions, they're going to have to change, you know, and because we're all of those are made up of the people, and the people are so diverse, and it's going to get even more so as people come into themselves and understand themselves better. And I think it's a matter of the institutions, whether they be traditional or non-traditional, those are going to have to respond to the diversity of all the people.
I see KJ. Would you like to make a comment?
First of all, I'd love to say Niizhaayek to you young ones, you know, that are doing this. I myself, you know, I know that path. I know that journey. I've lost my partner. At the same time, I have to look back at when it comes to a skirt, I have to acknowledge I am me. And inside me, that voice says, I am woman. And I'm proud that moment to wear that skirt, to honor my creator. I've come long ways. I've lost identity. I still am battling that today. But at the same time, there has to be areas, resources available for each and every one of the young people that do reach out, that can reach out. And I admire you for doing that and creating that. And I know that pathway up to spirit. And it can be hard, but this is my first time ever sitting in anything like this. And I have to say, it brings tears to my eyes. When they talk about truth and this whole thing, it starts at a core I heard the other day. And there's a core in each and every one of us. I admire and peeling a little bit off my healing to be who I am. And yes, I'm proud to wear a skirt. I laugh, I'll say I'm in drag one day. But at the same time, you know, I can accept in my healing who I am today. I've been on the road of, some want to say, Christianity. I've been in the longhouse where I come from. But today I'm learning that I am me. I stand before the Creator for who I am. And I'm going to be accountable for who I am and everything I do every day. But I admire the building across Turtle Island of resources to reach out for those young ones, because the days that we're in today can be so confusing for them, because their society and we that are two spirit, yes, we are many are gifted. Some can see ahead, some can see beyond. It's that two space. But I want to just say, Niizhaayek, very much. I enjoyed this session today, and I admire you young guys for all this. Niizhaayek.
Thank you, KJ, for your heartfelt words. I'm very appreciative that I was able to reach all you today in this session, and I'm grateful for the chance to, you know, discuss these topics because they're important for our young people in particular, and in supporting them and moving forward and giving them the space to be who they are. Thank you again to everyone who has, provided me feedback and all the wonderful words that I've been able to read and hear. I wanted to, I guess, conclude this session with me. Thank you again to all the people who have shared their experiences and all the comments. I'm definitely holding them close as I continue to do this work. And yeah, just last, thank you for everything.